Hello and welcome to the first episode of I Beg to Differ, a Duke Independent Film Festival podcast where we discuss movie topics that are relevant to the Duke community. Through this program, we wish to bring film to the Duke community and explore intersections between movies and the Duke life. Many film fans are eager to check out a variety of horror films. But what are some good horror films to check out this fall? What even is a horror film? How do horror films relate to our lives, if they relate at all? Leading our discussion today is our host, Gabe.
Hi, I'm Guillermo Caraceta. And for this podcast, we're going to be talking about fear in horror media in general. And that's sort of a broad topic, so we're going to be discussing a lot of different things. How fear relates to our personal lives, what we get out of horror movies, why we're attached to horror movies for this particular season, what makes fall so special for, this vibe and this type of, feeling, since there is something special to it, I think that we can talk about. And we're going to go through some segments like, how falls impacted our lives this semester, some of our go-to fall horror movies and shows, some of our favorite TV shows that focus on horror media, what role horror plays in the stories that we love. And then we're going to talk about last week in film as well. So we're going to go through some of the events that happened in the past week regarding film in general. And then we're just going to generally talk about film, since that's what this podcast is about. We're not going to limit ourselves just to one thing. But I'll introduce the rest of us. Sophia, if you want to go first with what your favorite fall movie was, or fall media, I guess, but just the best thing you watched this fall. And then everyone can go around and answer that same question.
Yeah, so I'm Sophia. I'm a Duke freshman, and this fall, one of the best movies I've seen was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which has always been in my watch list, and I finally got the chance to watch it because it was it was for my English class, and it was so fun and awesome. I definitely enjoyed it. It was so gory and scary, and I love like the gritty atmosphere of it. Obviously, Leatherface, the villain, is one of the most awesome like serial killers in horror films. One of my favorites for sure, and I can definitely see why it's one of like the best slasher movies and has such like a cult following. And I definitely want to rewatch it again. It'll probably be like one of those movies I'll just keep rewatching every Halloween. So happy I watched it.
Freshman here as well. I'm Olivia. Favorite thing I watched this fall was probably The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is a show on Netflix. It's the second part in a horror anthology series. The first part was called The Haunting of Hill House. But I think what I really like most about it is that the director, Mike Flanagan, he has this really great understanding of like what's missing from modern ghost stories, which I think is the tragedy aspect of it. So it's a really interesting take on like a ghost story, traditional haunted house narrative.
I'm Viraj. I'm a junior at Duke, interested also in writing and directing for film. I watched two really good movies, Good Time and Moon. Good Time by the same directors of Uncut Gems that recently came out. And yeah, it was very adventurous, thrilling, a lot of heartfelt moments too, and just kind of kept you on the edge of your seat. So I really enjoyed that. And Moon, I thought was a little creepy, like how the plot went forward and how the main character discovers things about his environment. I thought it was really well done.
What was your favorite thing this fall?
Well, I just watched Borat 2 yesterday, and it was hilarious. I was laughing a lot. On par is as funny as the first one, in my opinion. I haven't watched too many horror movies, but I've watched going back and watching a lot of older movies I haven't watched yet. Like, I got a projector in my room, so I watched Life's Beautiful, Pata Panchali, The Graduate, Unforgiven, and I watched Nightcrawler. I would really like that movie. So yeah, there's some great movies I've watched this fall.
Harry, what was your favorite thing this fall?
Red, you stole my idea for Borat. I was just about to talk about Borat. I actually watched both Borat movies, 1 and 2, this weekend. I would actually like to make the argument that Borat is actually a horror movie because it shows a lot of horrific, sort of the realistic realities that we live in here in the United States, but also society as general. And I think sometimes the realistic stuff are the most terrifying.
I love how fear can really just be added to any story, and it makes it a lot more suspenseful. But I'll go through what I think my favorite horror fall thing I watched this fall was, which was Over the Garden Wall, which for those of you who are unacquainted with it, was a Cartoon Network show, miniseries about fall and about two boys who get lost in the woods and have to delve deeper into the unknown. It's got a lot of fun moments. It's honestly one of the most fear-inducing shows I've watched, which is surprising. So if you're looking for a good horror show, definitely check that one out. But with all of our introductions out of the way, we can start with some more general, fall vibe talk. How are you guys doing this fall? And what do you think about, this current season? How the state of everything is going on when it comes to movies, when it comes to film, fear, anything like, really an open topic.
I guess it's not so much fall for me as it is more like midterm season, where you take a lot of midterms and exams. There's a lot of stress. And I think since our topic is about horror movies, I do think horror movies have a benefit of releasing some of that stress. I mean, just getting jump scares and everything like that, I think that's very much stress relieving. And I appreciate horror movies in the fall just because fall is usually one of the hardest seasons. And I think horror movies kind of get me through that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great horror shows that can maybe let you have like a better understanding of like your fears, your anxieties, and you come out of the movie, even while you were like terrified during the movie, you leave the movie sort of like a sense of, I can go back to the world and I can, do that studying for that midterm that I really need to do that I've been putting off.
I guess a show I've been kind of watching in and out in the fall is The West Wing and Parks and Rec. So I guess like those aren't like super serious, so they're kind of a little lighthearted that you can like watch a few a day or whenever you need a break and kind of escape from the stress.
Yeah, I definitely spent a bit of time watching the last debate, and it was interesting just the sheer amount of existential dread I felt during the whole thing. But I followed it up by watching some of the first season of American Horror Story, which was very cathartic and very fall themed, by the way.
I've been watching a lot of movies, watching a lot of stuff from my laptop, just still get the fall vibe here in North Carolina. I'm still enjoying it a lot.
Yeah, it really did hit me like today going outside. For those of you who are in Durham, yesterday was like 80 degrees. I was like boiling alive, and then I stepped outside and it was just like damp and cold. And I was like, I am not prepared for this. Winter is coming. But so I honestly think like we might be sort of in like a horror renaissance, this sort of like time period-ish, because I've noticed like you brought up like some slasher films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Sophia, but it seems like we're sort of moving towards horror incorporated in a lot of different shows that we wouldn't normally expect, which I really like. It seems like horror is really diversifying. It's, not necessarily like separating itself from its slasher roots, but it's really like been given like new life when it comes to like Netflix shows or like different streaming shows. And even like The Boys and shows like that have like really terrifying moments in them that you almost don't expect. And because you don't expect that type of, reaction out of like a show, it can be even more terrifying. I know you wrote an article about The Boys, Harry, if you wanted to talk about that. Do you consider it to be sort of like a horror show? I'm curious what you think, since you think Borat could be considered like a horror movie, and like what really makes like a horror TV show or horror movie like fit in that genre?
Yeah, that is a great question, Gabe. You talked about the horror renaissance, and I think The Boys is very much an example of that horror renaissance, where horror is not just the sort of slasher films that we see, but you see a lot of horror elements incorporated into other genres, and you have these new sort of movie viewing or show viewing experience. And I think The Boys is very much horror, like you said. It has a lot of terrifying moments, as terrifying characters. Like, for example, Homelander is a super terrifying character that you feel fear every time you see him. But I think one thing The Boy does well, which I think also relates to Borat, is that it shows a lot of real world terror too. Although this story is about superheroes and supervillains, a lot of the societal problems that it explores on are based on real problems that we have today in the US and in society. that makes you feel that, yeah, you don't really need superpowers to be a threat to society, and you don't need to have any sort of supernatural, I guess, evil beings to really be terrifying. And I think that's the best part of The Boys, where it doesn't, if you're not a horror fan, it's not going to force any horror on you. But if you are that kind of fan, it's going to give you that, but also so much more.
I do think that that's very interesting because, it's really exciting to see sort of all media taking elements from different types of genres. We're sort of moving away from like specific genres as we get into streaming, and it's sort of just becoming, like movies and TV shows are becoming like less typecasted, I feel, which is really cool. I'm curious if everyone saw Lovecraft Country. I personally haven't, but if anyone wanted to talk about it, I think that'd be a really cool thing to talk about. That being said, though, if no one watched it, completely understandable. I think we've all been pretty busy this semester, so I've had to have been like pretty picky, I guess, with the shows that I've watched. But I can talk more about those things later.
I have not seen Lovecraft Country yet, but I'm super excited to see it. My whole family has been harassing me for about a few months. They said it's super interpretive, and I'm so excited.
Based on the trailer, it seems very interesting, and I love like the Lovecraft like mythos, and that that feeling of the fear of the unknown has so many different angles you can like sort of play off of. But at the same time, I'm already in the middle of a couple TV shows, so it feels hard, to bring on like a new TV show when you're already, sacrificing your time, it seems. So for this second topic, we want to talk about something that scared us when we were younger, that left like a profound impact on us. Doesn't even have to be horror. It can be from like a kid's show or anything, because when we're kids, it's really easy to get scared by even something that may seem small.
I don't really have a scene that I kind of remembered out of context, but something that scared me as a kid was actually a video game, The Legend of Zelda, like Majora's Mask. I think looking back at it now, like the Nintendo 64 graphics would be pretty I don't know, funny, but back in the day I thought I was like the music, the characters, the kind of impending doom of the game. Basically the world is like ending in like 3 days and the main character has to save it, and I would just like every time me and my brother would play, I would just get scared and spooked, and I think that lasted for quite a while. So yeah.
Yeah, I've never played it, but it seems very existential compared to other Zelda games. Like, and it seems, frankly, like I think people now call it terrifying.
I actually have a very unfortunate experience in terms of my childhood horror. So I remember when I was in 3rd grade, we were on a trip, and I got scared. I couldn't sleep during the night. So I woke up, I tried to watch some TV, and I turned on the TV, and they were playing the Halloween movie on the TV. Obviously, being a 3rd grader, I didn't know what that was, so I was intrigued, and I kept watching. And obviously, it was an R-rated slasher film with a lot of blood and gore and killing, and that just left a really deep impact inside me, where after that trip, I always think that Michael Myers is going to show up at my house. But then, as I grew older, I got less scared of him, obviously. And then when the Halloween movie came out in 2018, I thought, this guy haunted me for my entire childhood. I got to go see this movie. And not only did I not find that scary, I actually found it to be a little funny. And I think that kind of puts an end to my childhood horror with Michael Myers. And now he just doesn't really scare me anymore.
Yeah, it's always satisfying to finally like face your fears that you had earlier in life, and sort of, as a more, mature person being like, that doesn't make me, terrified anymore. And that reminds me, actually, when I was a kid, I was terrified of Darth Vader for some reason. I had like a Darth Vader, like my dad gave me it as like a present, I think when I was like 10, and it was like, I don't know why, it was like the creepiest thing in the world for me, but randomly it would just like, it was a statue of Darth Vader that would say lines from the movie, and like when I least suspect it, I think it was like motion detecting or something, it would just like say a line from the movie, and it terrified me for like I think 2 years, but I was too like nervous to tell my parents I was scared of it, so I put up with it.
I had a similar experience to that. My dad is a really big Jaws fan, so he has this like Jaws movie poster in his bedroom, and every time I would see it when I was little, I would get so scared by just like the giant shark. And then I finally had the guts to finally see it in 3rd grade. And it scared me so much. And I live in Miami Beach. So I would go to the beach like every 2 weeks. And for like 6 months, I was scared to go in because I was so sure I was going to get eaten by a shark. And I was so scared of that movie. But then it actually, as I got older, it became one of my favorites. And obviously right now I have a movie poster of Jaws. So it just shows how like, yeah, you just go back to it, you fall in love with it. And yeah, just kind of like those little fears you have, irrational fears you have as a kid with horror movies.
Yeah, when I was younger, my parents showed me the movie. It's a Tim Burton. I don't know if you've seen it, Mars Attacks by Tim Burton. And the aliens in that movie just scared me so much. They had like these giant helmets and like big giant brains and big eyes, and they talked in this weird language, and it disturbed me so much. And like there's this scene where they took like this woman and transferred her, it's supposed to be comedy, transfer her head onto a dog and the dog's head onto her body. It freaked me out so much as a kid, and like I could not like watch this movie like ever. And then I watched it, I went back and like rewatched it, and it was like about a year ago. I found it hilarious. It was like the Jack Nicholson's of the president. Like I couldn't take the movie like that seriously, and like I was like, how was I scared of this as a kid? And like I it's just as Gabe said, like, you know, when you revisit these fears, like you see that you've like conquered them, just like Sophia did.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I mean, you guys know I'm a huge comic book fan, but like before the whole MCU craze started, the X-Men were like the big thing. So I was obsessed with the X-Men growing up. And I've seen all the movies, but the 3rd X-Men movie, X-Men Last Stand, is slightly more violent than the previous 2. And there's this whole plot line about how there's a senator who doesn't approve of mutants and is trying to like cure like mutant kind. And he has a son who is himself a mutant, and his mutation is he has angel wings. And there's a scene in the 3rd movie where like he's trying to like clip his wings off of his own back because his dad hates mutants. And it terrified me as a kid. Like I straight up hid behind a chair and forced my parents to turn the movie off. And I didn't see it for like 5 years after that.
I remember that scene. I was also terrified. I forgot about that until now. So thanks for bringing that up. But I'm curious if anyone has like if anyone remembers something that terrified them when they were a kid, but they think still holds up, since, you know, there's a lot of movies and stuff that we watched as kids. And I think we can also say, you know, not that we haven't like conquered that fear, but just, you know, that scene or that horror film or whatever it was about whatever we watched, just, you know, still stands the test of time and, you know, still terrifies you to this day. I'm wondering if anyone has a case like that. For me, I think it would honestly be Spirited Away. I still get terrified by that witch.
I think that's very scary as well. Spirited Away has many scary scenes. But actually, when I was 10 years old, I watched The Silence of the Lambs with my dad. And a scene towards like the end of the movie where she's like in the killer's house and it's pitch dark and he has these like night vision goggles on and he's just watching her. It's so terrifying. Just I rewatched it like last week and I was like, this is horrible. Like it's so deeply unsettling, like the voyeuristic aspect of it. And she just has no idea where he is.
Yeah, that was absolutely terrifying when I first watched it in like high school. And I was, you know, not having seen it before, I was still like, you know, it's an amazing movie and it does horror very well. That thrilling psychological fear that horror films can really get to.
Kind of related to the night vision that you mentioned, Olivia. I remember the scenes from The Predator when they would show like the Predator watching the humans with like the thermal vision that he had. It was, and like the weird heartbeat sound going in the background. I remember that really kind of spooked me and was like off-putting. And I feel like it still kind of gives me the butterflies in my stomach.
Oddly enough, I know what scene you're talking about because I've seen the clip, but I've never seen the Predator movie like all the way through because my parents tried to show it to me too young. And in the beginning of the movie where that guy like who's like skinned like his body like comes hanging out from the trees, I literally ran out of the room and just my parents turned the movie off. And I've still never seen it.
Yeah, it's not an easy. I feel like it's still pretty scary today.
I remember when I was like I think like elementary year, I was like really into like Alien versus Predator. I didn't watch any of the movies, but I had like consumed it somehow through like pop culture osmosis. And then I watched Alien like soon after that, and I was like, oh, this is a horror film? I didn't know. And I was completely terrified. I thought it was some sort of like action science fiction thing, and then that vibe switch was just, I mean, I was hooked and I loved the movie, but also like one of my favorite horror films, I think.
No, yeah, I wanted to talk about Alien as well. It was definitely, I watched it when I was like 10 or 11, and it scared me so much. And still to this day, I watched it over the summer again, and it still scares me. Even just like the iconic scene of like the alien being born, like I know it's gonna happen, but it's still like so terrifying. And just the fact that you don't really like you don't really see the alien for a lot of it, and you just kind of see like the presence of it, and it's super dark, and you see like everyone being like taken out by the alien, and it's so scary. And obviously just the design of the alien itself, it's still so terrifying just seeing it. And yeah, even though I've watched it since I was 12 and I've rewatched it a bunch of times, it's still really, really scary, even all the iconic scenes. And even though it's like you said, so rooted in like pop culture at this point, it still has like the same effect regardless.
Speaking of Alien, actually, if you guys are Alien fans, I'm curious to know what you guys thought of Prometheus.
I really like Prometheus. I really do.
I do too, but you go
I
ahead.
really like how it took how it's like, because I feel like a lot of people went into that movie thinking like they want to see xenomorphs and they want to see aliens and they want to see it, but you didn't really get that. It was like its own kind of story. It just kind of exists in the Alien universe. I really like that. But then they changed it up with Covenant a little bit, and I was like, I still like Covenant, but like I wish they'd gone more of the Prometheus track that they were going.
Yeah, I like how Prometheus handled the mystery of it. I think it set up like that sort of new story very well, and I was like, not necessarily like hooked with the characters necessarily, but like the world building still I thought was cool. And like the visuals, like I don't think you can knock down the visuals because I think it's an amazing looking movie still. I was still a little bit disappointed with Covenant though, like you were, Rhett, because I think for me, I think it went a little bit too heavy handed with the religious symbolism. It didn't really make sense for the themes of the movie. Whereas, in the previous Alien movies, it was much more like alluded to that, this, mankind trying to ascend to godhood. It almost felt like shoved down your throat in Covenant, where they spent a lot of time just, emphasizing that was the theme of the movie, and it didn't really come across as genuine.
I'd say that I'm definitely in the minority when I say I enjoyed Prometheus. But so I feel like they definitely heard the complaints and they decided to take it more of the alien track and like show more of like aliens and Covenant and stuff compared to like what they did in Prometheus. I'm a little disappointed by that, but still, like, I enjoy Alien and Aliens. I don't really like Alien 3 and Resurrection very much. Not really at all. But Prometheus and Covenant, I don't mind.
I agree with you completely. I'm like so in the minority whenever I tell anyone that I liked Prometheus, but I just thought it was such a cool new direction that they tried to like really flesh out. And afterwards, I followed like the whole saga of like different flip-flops of what the next movie was going to be. I mean, Ridley Scott originally intended to follow up on the story that he started with on Prometheus, but then like everyone's like, no, like everyone's complaining there's not enough xenomorphs, let's just change the entire thing. And I was so disappointed, but I do still think Covenant's a good movie. It's just not a great movie.
I agree with you on that, Steve.
I think it does like Prometheus is one of those movies that gets me excited for more movies like that, even though necessarily it's not like a perfect film by any stretch, but I think it's good, and it has like a layer of mystery, like it leaves you with like a cliffhanger mystery ending, which I really miss from, I guess, horror or different things like that. Like I miss when it feels like there could be like 3 more movies made on like just what they talked about in that movie. What is your favorite horror movie or show of all time? I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on this. If anyone wants to go ahead,
I can go first. Mine is absolutely The Shining. That movie, I think, is what I would consider a very few movies I consider like perfect. I think The Shining is like perfect for like what it is, like what it was trying to accomplish, and despite like not being like too like faithful to the Stephen King's book, it creates such a great feeling of like unsettling. Like even when you watch it, like the beginning, when I watched it the first time, the first 20-30 minutes, like I knew something like was really off when I watched it, like, and nothing had happened. Like just the way like the dialogue's delivered, the scene, cinematography, like it just felt strange. And as things kept getting weirder and weirder, you don't really know like what like the thing is like that's causing the like hotel and stuff to like do this stuff and like why Jack Nicholson is like going crazy. But the thing is, that's what I think is scary. What's implied, like what you don't see, like what you don't know, what's up to debate, like what's up to interpretation, and the fact that you don't really understand what's going on just makes it that much scarier.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love The Shining, and I think it's one of Stanley Kubrick's best films. And just the amount of detail that he put into every single scene is incredible. I think you can enjoy that film purely for its like artistic creation, like the amount of effort that went into every part of it. You can just appreciate that and be in love with it. But the fact that it has that added layer of growing suspense throughout the entire movie with that amazing payoff at the end, I think it's a perfect like slow burn movie. I wish more films were able to capture that same type.
Like no spoilers because I know some people probably have not seen Shining, but the very last scene, the very last shot, like it's so up to debate and so like mysterious. Like it still chills me whenever it happens. Like the very last scene, like the very last shot of the movie, I'm like, wait a minute, like what does that mean? Like what does that mean? And like you just don't know, and that's what unsettles me the most when I watch it.
Does everyone consider Seven to be a horror movie?
Yes.
I consider it more
Yeah,
thriller.
psychological thriller, that same type of genre.
Because I think that's the scariest movie I've seen. I think not so much because of, I think it's scary because they don't really show you all the violence that's happening. It's not very gory. It has gory scenes certainly, but most of it is sort of the descriptions of the characters saying what happened to the victims. And I think that somehow makes it even scarier because you can imagine what happened to them, and different people can have different interpretations of what happened to these victims. And I also think the whole movie is just so deeply realistic in the sense that this could happen in any city, in sort of any place with anyone. And I think that's the most terrifying part because you feel that, if you're unlucky, this kind of stuff could really happen to you.
Yeah, and it also handles that like noir aspect of storytelling very well. Like the way it's shot, cinematography, it really grips you into the mystery. And in terms of like not really knowing where it's headed, I think it's a film that does that excellently. In the way that it sort of uses your own assumptions about what the film is going to be to its advantage by subverting what you think is going to happen in a very.
So yeah, I wrote the article about Seven last month, and I said that one of the most powerful aspects of that movie, in my opinion, is that they never tell you like what city this is happening in, and never say where it is. They're just like, oh, it's this dark place. And the first scene when Morgan Freeman asks Brad Pitt, like, why did you move here? This place sucks. This place is full of crime. Why did you move here? And that's also like what adds to the darkness, and it all builds so perfectly to like one of the best endings I've ever seen in a movie.
Sadly, I haven't seen Seven. I know it's on my list, but yeah, kind of piggybacking off what Rhett said. I think The Shining, because I mean, first of all, I don't consider myself to watch a whole lot of horror movies because I get scared easily, and I don't feel like watching horror movies alone, like at night in my room. But of the ones I've seen, I think definitely The Shining, because like even the first shot where like, or maybe not the first shot, but the first couple of scenes where they're like driving across the mountains and there's like a helicopter shot, just kind of with some ominous music in the background, that instantly kind of draws you in closer. And yeah, like Rhett said, just so much suspense throughout the movie, and then the pace change at the end is very, very engaging.
I suppose my favorite horror movie, it's really not a traditional horror movie. It's like a crime, like psychological thriller. It's a movie called Prisoners, and Denis Villeneuve directed it. And okay, I watched the movie with my dad, and the whole plot of the movie is like, oh, well, like, what if these two girls like got kidnapped and like their parents are like looking for them and everything like that. But I think the whole like moral questions in the movie about how far would you go to like for like your children really messes me up. And there's a really unique horror like torture aspect in the movie that I hadn't seen before, which really freaked me out. I think it made it worse watching it with my dad, if anything.
It's crazy that horror movies, like who you're with, can completely change the experience. I feel like if you're watching like the scariest movie ever, if you're with like your best friend, you're going to be like along for a good ride and it's fine. But if you're by yourself, or even with like, I guess like, in that case, like that with your dad, that special like connection, like it's crazy how that changes your perception of the film. But I'm curious, Sophia, what's your favorite horror movie?
Yeah, so my favorite horror movie is probably The Sixth Sense. I think it's one of the movies I've watched it's one of the horror movies I've watched the most. And I guess it was the first movie I've watched with like that kind of major plot twist. Obviously, I won't spoil, but I mean, I think it's pretty common knowledge that the ending is just incredible. It has one of the best like child performances ever. I still can't believe that kid pulled off that performance. And just like a lot of the scenes, it doesn't have a lot of like scary scenes, but the ones it has just like just terrified me a lot when I was young, and I still keep rewatching it. And every time I rewatch it, there's like something else that I hadn't seen before. And I just found it super super creepy, and I'm really big into like ghost horror movies. And I really like the atmosphere of it, and just kind of like, and yeah, just that really really shocking ending that I still get shocked over many many times and still holds up today. So yeah, I definitely think The Sixth Sense is one of my favorites.
I didn't know people thought it was a horror movie, to be honest. I thought, did you know what the twist was going into it? Um,
I did not know the twist. I didn't even know that it was about like ghosts. So it was really interesting just seeing like because you know the famous line of like I see dead people. Most people already know there's like that element to it. But when I saw it, like you already see this like kid and he's like struggling through something, don't really know what it is. So I definitely found it interesting just going in fully blind. And yeah, right now I guess it kind of sucks because it's become such like pop culture that most people already know the twist. Most people already know it's like a has like ghosts and everything. But yeah, when I watched it like fully blind, I was definitely really shocked by the twists and I thought it was like so unexpected. So that also like just made it even scarier for me.
yeah, and then I think for my favorite horror film media of all time, I was going to say Over the Garden Wall, but it's honestly it's not something that you can really talk about too much since it's so packed with content that you really have to go into it with no expectations. So I'll say right now to everyone out there listening, watch Over the Garden Wall. I think it's the perfect fall vibe movie, and it's a like miniseries that is all about overcoming fear and overcoming like the fear of the unknown. So if you're looking for something like that, I think it's a very interesting take on horror. But with that being said, I think my favorite horror movie besides that is Suspiria. If any of you guys have seen it, the 2018 remake. I think it's one of the most inventive horror movies that I've ever seen, and it's one of the only horror movies that sort of like legitimately makes me terrified too. Just with the dancing, with the way everything is expressed, I think it's a beautiful film to watch, and it's sort of hauntingly beautiful in a way because you don't want to look away, but at the same time, some of the things that happen are really like graphic and horrendous, but done in a very intense dance like motion that it becomes as a complete package this weird really enjoyable mixture.
All right, and that wraps up our discussion for today. Thank you so much, Gabe, for the amazing hosting, and thank you so much to everyone for joining in and tuning in to this episode. We will have more episodes in the future talking about different topics. You can also become part of DIF by submitting an application to the editorial board or the executive board. Check us out on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and we will see you in the next episode.